Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. Diversity in fiction is something that a lot of people talk about these days. Stories written from the perspective of people and characters from different cultures, characters with disabilities, books with characters of colour or LGBTQ characters. Books act as a way to both escape everyday life, but also as a way to see our everyday lives reflected back to us. Stories represent human experiences and reflect situations we are familiar with. On that basis, seeing characters who look and act the same way we do in the books that we read helps us understand how we fit in. So reading my next guest's debut novel, Something Blue, published by Ultimo Press, was like a breath of fresh air. In it, I found characters who were familiar to me, people I'd grown up around, and people who shared a similar heritage. A clever and entertaining book about going back to your cultural roots. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome Alex Sarkis to the podcast today. Hi, Alex.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to chat.
Congratulations on this terrific debut.
Thank you so much.
It's been a few months since its release, so I wanted to know how you're feeling about its reception.
I'm actually feeling so good about the reception. Obviously this is my first novel, so I was very anxious going into it. You never really know how something's going to be received until it actually hits the public. You know, it's one thing to have friends and family and publishers say, oh, I really like it, it's great, but you don't know really how the public's going to receive it until they do. And it's the feedback that I've been getting has been so great. I get messages literally from all over the country from people from all walks of life saying how much they enjoyed it. And every time I get a review, it's still like a real shock to me. I just can't believe that. I can't believe how well it's been received so far. So I've been really blessed on that front to have had people read it and really connect with it in the way that they have. It's been really so rewarding and so exciting. So yeah, I've been very happy so far.
I'm so thrilled to hear that for you, Alex. That's just wonderful. So without further ado, I was wondering, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read your book as I have, can you tell me a little bit more about the story?
Sure. So basically the story is about a young Lebanese woman named Nicole. She goes through a rough breakup, which basically results in her arriving at a bit of a crossroads. So she decides to pick up her camera and return to the melting pot of Sydney's West to rediscover her roots. You know, as a result of that, she starts spending more time with her grandmother and also with her childhood friend, Danny, who, you know, basically makes his living on the wrong side of the law. And as their relationship begins to intensify, it forces Nicole to face up to some hard truths, not just about herself, but also about the people around her.
Alex, what inspired you to start writing Nicole's story?
I think the biggest inspiration to write this story was the fact that I didn't really feel that there was much else out there like it. That was my major motivator and my major inspiration. Also the fact that it was a fairly easy reach for me in the sense that I had inspiration around me every day to write this story, just from different characters or conversations or places that I would go to just in my daily life. And I've always felt that Sydney, and in particular Sydney's West, has so much, you know, untapped potential in terms of storytelling. There are so many stories out there and so many characters that are larger than life and so much to draw on. So that's basically all my main inspiration points in terms of really writing this story and sticking it out.
Yeah, fantastic. We chatted a little bit before I pressed record, and I mentioned to you that whilst I didn't grow up in Western Sydney, and so I don't want to misrepresent or suggest that I had the same kind of upbringing that Nicole from the book did, but I certainly have encountered some of the characters in the wider Lebanese community and my extended family who very much felt like the characters in your book. So what I wanted to ask you was, were you worried about stereotyping, or were you more interested in reflecting the kind of people that you encountered?
Both. You know, I think one of my approaches to this was to never shy away from the stereotype, but rather I really wanted to include them, but make those characters in my book very layered so that when the reader has finished the book and walks away from the story, if they encounter those types of people in real life, or they see them on the news or whatever it may be, their perspective of them has shifted a bit, because basically I just wanted to humanize those characters and those stereotypes with this story. So I wasn't really worried about stereotyping, because I always had that sort of approach in mind, that I was going to meet those things head on. But also, the thing about a stereotype is that, it's, even though it's only part of the story, in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily untrue. I mean, I know heaps of people that fit the stereotype. They're just not two-dimensional. They have all these other facets to their characters. So I definitely wanted to stay as authentic as I could in terms of the characters in the book. And by that, I drew on different personality traits of people I know, or people that I've heard of, or stories that I've either experienced or, I've heard about. And those things kept the plot, the novel, very authentic and reflect. I felt I tried my best to just write it as it is, and not try and dilute anything, or sort of stray away from that approach of just telling the truth about certain stereotypes rather than shying away from them altogether.
It's fair to say that Nicole's journey back to the western suburbs of her youth gives her pause to appreciate the melting pot of humanity the western suburbs actually represent. Was that something you deliberately set out to explore in this book, and why?
It is something I deliberately set out to explore, mainly because I just wanted to put a spotlight on Sydney's West. I just love it so much. I feel like it's definitely got, some darker aspects to it, but overall it was just such a funny place to grow up, and it has such a sense of community out there. For me, it was always about, faith, family, food, all of those really wholesome things that don't necessarily get spoken about as much as other things do in terms of mainstream media. When people say Sydney's West, if you're not from there, certain things will pop into your head that may not be, that kind of a vibe. So I really wanted to just shine a spotlight on the West in terms of those things, and in terms of what it was like growing up there. It was great. I wouldn't have wanted to grow up anywhere else. All my relatives are out there, my church is out there. So those kind of things, when I think about the West, I always have such an affection toward it because of my experience out there that I wanted to share.
Another thing that I found so fascinating, Alex, was Nikki's relationship with Danny. Now, you spoke a little bit about this, about, sort of peeling back the layers of, characters that we kind of feel are stereotypical. Danny was a young man who clearly had many challenges, and who turned to a life of crime to keep his family together and to support them. It's hard to reconcile what he did for a living with the honourable and decent man that he showed to Nicole. So I wanted to ask you, why was it important for you to explore this in the novel?
It was important for a few reasons. I mean, definitely the whole bit about stereotypes and wanting to layer them and show that everybody, basically the big takeaway from this story, I hope, is that even if somebody appears to be an ugly stereotype, if you dig deep enough, you can find something to like about them or to sympathize with. At the end of the day, everyone's human, everyone has a story, everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes life runs away from you and you end up somewhere you never thought you'd be, which was partly Danny's case in the story. So there was definitely that aspect to it that I wanted to explore. I just feel like Middle Eastern people, particularly Middle Eastern men, get such a bad rap in mainstream media, because that's the only time they're ever spoken about is when they do something, horribly wrong, or they get arrested, or whatever else it may be. So that was a motivator in writing a character like him. But as well, one of my biggest motivators in writing this story was to write something entertaining that readers would love and readers would fall in love with. At the end of the day, it's fiction. When you pick up a book like mine, you want to fall in love. You want to enjoy the story and the relationships and get swept up in it all. And Danny's character is a bit of that. Everybody loves a bad boy with a heart of gold. What can I say? So it was a little bit of playing that card, and also a little bit of, wanting to somewhat make a statement about the way that Middle Eastern men in particular are portrayed, and then try and add some layers to that and sort of flesh that out a bit to again shift the perspective of, that part of that community.
And I think you did an excellent job of that. Not that you need me to say that, but from a reader's perspective, I was thoroughly engaged with Danny and his story, his backstory in particular, and it made me truly understand why people do what they do, and I think, but in particular, maybe this is a bit of a generalization, but I feel like Middle Eastern men have a genuine love of family and their protective instincts for their family are very strong.
Yeah. Again, we're speaking very generally here, but in my experience, they still really toe the line in terms of that traditional gender role and what they think what their duty is in life in terms of, what you said, family, faith, their role as husbands and fathers and brothers and whatever else it may be. And that was something that I wanted to explore too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, I loved the way, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but I loved the way you peppered this story with terms and phrases that are so familiar to me. The Arabic terms for grandma and grandpa, things that I've passed down to my children, the food that I grew up eating, and the swear words. Oh my goodness, the swear words, which every Lebanese kid learns first, I must add.
Yeah.
And
you can pretty much get by on just those few phrases.
My kids have virtually nil Arabic, but they all know the swear words, right? And I say this with the utmost respect, Alex, but I wondered if you worried about including so much of this throughout the narrative. For me, it was an opportunity for a giggle and sometimes a massive belly laugh because I could see how that scenario might play out. I'd seen it with my own eyes a million times in my lifetime. But for the non-Lebanese reader?
That's interesting because there was a bit of a concern that there wasn't enough in terms of translation that went throughout the book. But I did sort of troubleshoot it with a few non-Lebanese friends and non-Lebanese readers. And I went to great pains to make sure that when there was Arabic included that didn't have, a direct translation, the meaning was either very heavily implied before or after, and also it wasn't detrimental to the scene or to whatever was going on. A big thing for me was to just really strike that balance between not alienating those non-Arabic speaking readers and also not putting so much translation in the book that it becomes taxing on Arabic speaking readers. In many ways, I wrote this book for everybody because the themes for me are universal. It's about love and loss and family, and who hasn't experienced those things or would be able to relate to those things. But as well, I wrote a lot of it as a sort of, a wink to a particular community and a time and a place. And I wanted them to feel that. I wanted them to pick that up and feel like the book was for them, that it wasn't, not every single Arabic word or line was being translated the mass market. So it was a bit of a delicate balance, but I definitely wanted it to play out like that for those reasons.
And so incredibly well done. Thank you for that. Thank you for the belly laughs.
So good. I feel like swearing gets that reaction in any context,
Yes, but when you have heard your dad
yeah,
say those
exactly.
words, when they've hit their thumbnail with a hammer and that the
Yeah.
word, the expletive comes out, because
Yeah.
that's their natural reaction. That's their gut instinct to swear.
You have to keep it authentic. Definitely, I was a little bit concerned in some parts. I was most concerned about my mum reading it because she had to actually go through and edit most of the Arabic for me, to make sure that it was. And she hates swearing. She hates. So I literally sat down and she was having a cup of tea. And she's very proper, my mum, and it was a very funny moment in my life having to have her go through and edit these phrases and you'd spell it like this. I could tell I was really getting to the end of her patience in a few parts, but it had to be done. So yeah.
Oh, I so love that. I can't tell you. That's just brilliant. Alex, when I was reading Something Blue, the thought that kept crossing my mind, and we've touched a little bit on this, was that you are brave. And then I was annoyed with myself for thinking that because writing the other shouldn't be brave or considered different. And then I wondered if it said something about me as a writer. So I wanted to ask you, did you ever feel like it was bravery or did it never cross your mind?
I think the whole thing I had to be brave about, like I said before, because it was my first book, I was going into it blind in a lot of respects. I didn't really know how it was going to be received by anyone, and I think actually my overriding fear was how it was going to be received by the Lebanese community. I think that was my biggest concern, not really the wider market, more them, because like I said, there's not many books out there like this. And if they didn't like it, that for me would have been the biggest fail. So in that regard, that was probably my biggest anxiety. Thank God it's been generally quite well received and everybody's really enjoying it. So that's fantastic. But in terms of being brave in other aspects, I mean, I think that even though, Middle Eastern people in general don't get a very good rap in terms of what's out there commercially or in the mainstream media, there's an underlying, I don't want to say obsession, but there's a real interest there. Even though it's largely negative, people are interested, they're intrigued about the Lebanese community and Western Sydney. And I, to a certain extent, wanted to sort of capitalize on that and then switch up the narrative, because I felt like people were already interested, and then I was going to sort of lift the curtain on it and show what it's really like behind all those headlines. So I wasn't worried to do that. I think it was, tactical to a certain extent, in that this story was my competitive advantage in terms of the fact that I could write about it. It's something that I know, and that's that old adage of write what you know. I know this really well, so I knew I could do a good job writing about it, and I knew that there was already an interest, or at least there was this a bit of intrigue around this community, my community, and the West. You can see it in every time you turn on the news. So I was actually excited on that front to draw on those things and to just write something really authentic. My biggest anxiety, like I said, was definitely how it was going to be received by my own community, and thank God that all went well. So, yeah.
So you were talking a little bit about the fact that people are interested in this. So I wondered whether there were other Lebanese Australian writers who influenced your work or your desire to write about this.
I've read a few. I haven't read a lot. I've read a few, but I think that most of the ones that I've read have been written by men. So that's how I knew as well that this was like a little bit of a special take on it, because it's adult fiction written by, a Lebanese woman about being a Lebanese woman with a slight commercial spin on it, so which doesn't normally happen. So that's what kind of set this story apart from other stories that were out there. Like I've read The Lebs, for example. I felt like that was really interesting because it spoke to a very particular time and place and particular incidents that were happening in Sydney at that time in Punch Bowl. And, so it was really, really interesting in that regard. And reading books like that definitely helps you in terms of thinking, yeah, this is possible to talk about, your own community and your own experiences and have it be published all over the country. But another book that really helped me and really inspired me, it's an Australian writer but not a Lebanese writer, was Trent Dalton's Boy Swallows Universe, because I'm not sure if you've read that, but his story, writing that about, suburbs on the outskirts of Brisbane and this unbelievable cast of characters, and having it steeped so much in his own reality and his own stories growing up, was a big inspiration for me and really encouraged me to write this story. So yeah, definitely Australian writers have influenced my writing so much, just on the whole.
Yeah, fantastic. I have interviewed Trent Dalton.
Big fan.
He's just the most delightful man to interview and just so incredibly generous with his time. Yeah, I can definitely see some parallels between, that.
It's very obviously he's on another level, but it encouraged me a lot to be able to write the story the way I wanted to write it. So, yeah.
Alex, there are a lot of writers that listen to this podcast, and I wondered if you could share with me a little bit about your path to publication.
My path to publication. So basically I started writing this story as a hobby. I've always liked writing, but definitely throughout my 20s, especially my early 20s, I was very distracted, living my life and traveling and going out. And it wasn't really something I was taking seriously or that I thought would be a career for me. And then I got the idea to write this story, mainly to cure writer's block, because I was trying to write another story. It wasn't really working out. I knew, like I said, I would have so much inspiration every day to write a story like this. And then when I had written a really decent chunk of it, I decided to sign up to a workshop. So I I went and did that course at the Australian Writers Centre. I can't recommend doing that enough, especially for first-time writers or people that are looking to get published for the first time. If you're like me and you are very shy about showing people your work, which I was up until that point, I think maybe one person had read anything that I'd written. That course was invaluable in terms of they sort of throw you a little bit in the deep end, like you have to show your work to the whole class like every few weeks and whatever else. But it's really good because you get all this feedback from all these people, different walks of life. You can see how your story lands. They have fresh eyes to tell you like where the holes are in your plot and what characters need to be developed. And obviously your tutor's very good too. So that was a massive part in terms of my path to publication, from going from basically taking this from a hobby and something that I did every now and then and kept to myself, to really working on the story and developing it and trying to get it to a standard that would be worthy of publication. I think everybody needs a bit of help on that front. And then after that, my tutor told me she was very happy with how it was going, and she said, when you're finished with it and you're happy with it, let me know and I'll start helping you push in the right direction. And a big part of that was doing the ASA literary speed dating. So you basically have to get on and pitch your story in a few minutes to different publishers. It's super nerve-wracking. And I did, I think, 2 rounds of that. But I ended up signing with Ultimo, which was who I wanted to sign with. I just felt like that was going to be the best home possible for this story in terms of them being a Sydney-based publisher, a bit more on the smaller side, so they could give me that time and attention that I needed as a first-time writer. My publisher there, Alex Sarkis, was just brilliant. She believed in the story right away as soon as she read it and really took to it. So that was basically my whole journey to getting published. You have to be patient. You have to really believe in what you're writing, and you have to get used to rejection. That's just part of the game. But at some point, someone's going to say yes. It's my experience. If you keep at it and you stay true to the story that you're trying to tell, the door will open.
Now, I just wanted to give a shout out for this incredible cover.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Absolutely love this cover. There is, I don't know who designed it.
George Sard. He's brilliant. Yeah.
Lebanese designer.
Yeah, exactly. Takes a village.
Yeah, it takes a village. I love her cedar tree necklace. I love the power lines that are reflected in her sunglasses. Such a gorgeous representation of Nicole, I thought. And that's exactly how I pictured her, I must say. So, Alex, I felt like we weren't quite finished with Nicole and her story. So I'm hoping that you're going to tell me that you're writing something else about her.
I am writing something else about her. I mean, I'd always planned to sort of run a sequel after this. It's more than likely not going to be the next book I release, but it's definitely in the pipeline. I've got the sequel all mapped out. I know what's going to happen. So hopefully we can make that happen at some point.
Alex and Robert and James, if you're listening to this podcast, I want to see a sequel. Okay.
That'd be great.
I'm sure it'll happen. Alex, if listeners wanted to connect with you to learn more about you and your books, where can they find you?
The best place to find me is actually on Instagram. So just at Alex_Sarkis, and you can DM me and I'll answer all your questions. It's actually been really good being accessible in that way and being able to talk to so many people that have read it and being able to engage with them. It's just been really, really cool. So definitely Instagram. I'm on there most of the day, so ready to answer.
Procrastinating.
Exactly right.
Alex, I can't tell you how much I loved Something Blue. Thank you for a brilliant read, and I cannot wait to see what comes next for you. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.